The upcoming earnings release for Nvidia on the 28th of August is being labeled a quote, drop the mic moment for the stock market. This is a company that some people like James Anderson, former fund manager at Baillie Gifford, thinks could actually reach 50 trillion in market cap over the next decade. It's been the absolute darling of the stock market over the last year. And with this earnings release coming up, I thought it was a great time to put together a video on Nvidia on their last earnings release, talk a little bit about earnings releases in general, things you need to watch out for so you're ready for the 28th of August, because everybody, trading desks across the world, are going to be on pause to watch and see the results from Nvidia. This could have a huge impact on the market, so let's get into it in today's video, Nvidia upcoming earnings release. Right, so let's get into it and have a look at Nvidia's most recent quarterly report. We can go through that, get an idea of some of the things that you want to have a look at here for their upcoming release on the 28th. Okay, so what I've done on this screen is I've actually just gone to the investor relations page for Nvidia, and as you can see here, some of the main areas that we want to be looking at, like the press release. So let's have a start with the press release. So here we have the release from May 22nd, 2024 for Nvidia. And in the press release, basically what's happening here is the company is putting out the press release with some of the main bullet points that they want to present to the market. And the thing about this, you'll get a good rundown of that earnings release itself, but it also is a way that the company will use to highlight the best performing metrics. So depending on how deep you want to look into this, and if you're a stock investor, you should really go deep into the financial statements. But if you're just kind of a casual glancer, the press release is going to give you a fair amount of information, to be honest, okay? But just keep in mind, it is something that, you know, it's going to be a little bit biased where the management is putting out the best numbers possible. But if we look at the most recent report for Nvidia here, you'll see at the top you get a couple of bullet points, and one of the main things there is the revenue. And because they're growing so fast as part of this whole tech revolution, revenue growth is one of the most important metrics for them. It's important for everybody, of course, but more so for a company in the stage that they're in and what's going on with tech and all the AI spending, because Nvidia is benefiting from that at this early stage. So as you can see at the top here, we've got record quarterly revenue of 26 billion. And the most important thing you want to see, how much is that up on a percentage basis from the most previous quarter, in this case 18%, and from the same quarter a year ago. And as you can see in Nvidia's case, it's actually up 262%, which is an absolutely phenomenal number. They've blown expectations out of the water in their last quarter, okay? So revenue growth is a big one. You'll also see some other news that the company will announce, like things as they've done in their stock split, an increase in their quarterly dividends, any other major news that they want you to know that typically comes at the top of the press release. Then as you get further into the press release, you'll find more information in there. And while revenue is generally considered top line, earnings per share is considered bottom line. So if we have a look at the last quarter for Nvidia, their earnings per share came in at $5.98. So where does that number actually come from? Well, what it is the net profit, which we'll see shortly on the Form 10Q. And you take that net profit, or their net income, and you divide it by the number of shares outstanding, and that will give you the earnings per share. So Nvidia reported earnings per share of $5.98, which was up 21% from their previous quarter and a staggering 629% from a year ago. So absolutely phenomenal numbers. You'll then generally see a little bit of text, a little bit of commentary from the CEO or the CFO, and in Nvidia's case, you know, Jensen Huang, the CFO at the moment, as Dan Ives has mentioned, is basically considered like the godfather of AI. So any commentary he has, particularly around how the quarter was and what they're seeing for the upcoming quarter, will give really good insight to what's happening at the company. But of course, you've got to remember as well, this is coming from the CEO's mouth, right? So he's going to have his own biases, but it's worth reading nonetheless. And as you scroll through, you'll get information on, you know, in this case, their chips, how they're performing, the production of the chips, which is really important for them. Are they dealing with any supply chain issues? All of this will be listed out, as you can see here. As we scroll down, you'll get a little bit more of a breakdown in terms of the revenue and the net income, which is their profit, and how we came to that earnings per share that we mentioned above. So the revenue is just their sales, the amount of the amount of money they brought in sales, and then you start taking off all the different operating expenses, cost of goods sold, all of these things to come down to the actual operating income and the net income. And net income is the ultimate number that you want to see because it's actually just the profit. There's another thing that I think is worth looking at, particularly in Nvidia's case and others as well, and that's their gross margin. And the margin is just really how much profit they're making on the revenue that they're bringing in. So I like to think of it like this. If a company make things for $4, it costs them $4 and they sell it for 10, then they've got a 60% margin in there. And the margins, are always under pressure because as your margins are wide, and at 78%, Nvidia's margins are extremely wide. That would be the dream of any company, really. But that's the opportunity that other companies are going to try and get a piece of as competitors come into it. I think it was Jeff Bezos who said one time, your margin is my opportunity. And gross margin, any operating margins, these are worthwhile numbers to look out for. Again, particularly in the case of Nvidia. If they can maintain those margins, continue with revenue growth, then the profits will only get higher. And as profits get higher, earnings per share gets higher, and the company gets a higher valuation or market cap. Because market cap is really just, it's the number of shares outstanding times the actual share price, and that's the value of the company. As I said, James Anderson, famous fund manager from Baillie Gifford, had said he thinks Nvidia could be worth up to 50 trillion in the next decade. Amazing stuff. So as you scroll down, you'll get your GAAP and your non-GAAP earnings that we've just gone through. Again, you've got your revenue minus all of the expenses to come up with your net profit, and then therefore your earnings per share. This, I think, is really important, and that is the outlook. And I think this is going to be really important for Nvidia as well, because what we want to see is, are the big companies like your Microsofts, Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, who've let us know in their most recent earnings report themselves, they're going to be investing more and more money into AI, building out the data centers, buying more chips. But how is Nvidia seeing this for the upcoming quarter? So they will set their expectations for that quarter, and this will give us an insight to how the spending is going by these other companies and how much of this Nvidia is likely to capture. So the outlook is very important as well. So keep in mind on the 28th of August, when you want to have a look at Nvidia's earnings results, that you want to see what their upcoming forecast is like. Okay, and then they'll just give further breakdown into the revenue, the departments or the areas of their business that is generating the revenue, and they'll give commentary around that. So the press release is a quick and easy way just to get a rundown on what the quarter was like. Okay, the other thing you can do, other than the press release, you can have a look at they'll have an earnings call afterwards. It's typically about an hour after your earnings are released, but you can dial into that, and the CFO generally talks a lot about the quarter, what happened, and then again what they expect to have in the upcoming quarter. So the earnings conference call is something that's absolutely worth watching as well. So that's the press release. The Form 10Q. So this is a requirement by the SEC in the US for publicly listed companies. They need to produce their earnings every quarter, and they do so through this form, the 10Q. And this is where you'll get a lot more information beyond the press release that we just went through. So if you're thinking about buying stock in a company like Nvidia and you want to learn more, you want to do more due diligence, then the 10Q is what you really need to go through. Okay, so we'll just scroll through a little bit here and see the 10Q for Nvidia. It's a 126-page document, so obviously we won't go through all of it today. But this is where you can really start breaking down and getting into the revenue, getting into the gross profit, looking at all those different operating expenses that they have, where that's all coming from. Costs are obviously a very important part of this, because sometimes companies release their earnings, they have a great earnings release, but the stock actually sells off a lot, and there could be many reasons for that. Subscriber growth is dropping, say in a case like Netflix, or as we saw with Alphabet in their most earnings release, and as I mentioned on my previous video, when they released their earnings, the stock sold off so much because they're investing so much in AI, and investors are not so sure they're going to be seeing the return. So sometimes a stock can have a great earnings release in terms of profit, and the stock will sell off because of something found in the Form 10Q that investors don't like. So just be aware of that. If you're a buy and hold investor, it doesn't matter so much. But if you're trying to actively trade around an earnings release, just be aware it doesn't necessarily move in the way you think, even though they, beat expectations. If they're not beating expectations and they come below, then typically the stock will sell off, unless there's something in the outlook for the next quarter that's really going to benefit the company and drive the stock price further. So here you see the 10Q, and as I mentioned, you get further information, and the balance sheet as well is definitely worth looking at. So in the balance sheet, the things that you kind of want to look for, that I always look for when I have a look at it, is the amount of cash that they have on the balance sheet. Cash is what pays the bills at the end of the day, right? And then you want to have a look at their liabilities. How much debt does the company have? Short-term debt, long-term debt, and other long-term liabilities. Because at the end of the day, a company's solvency is really what matters in terms of whether they're going to survive or not. So have a look at their assets, have a look at their liabilities. Assets minus liabilities will equal the shareholders' equity. Okay, and when I look here at Nvidia, well, I can see their total liabilities is only 27 billion, but they've got total assets of 77 billion. So nearly 3 times the debt they actually have in assets. And of course, we saw the revenue figures around 26 billion as well. So they actually bring in enough revenue to cover their liabilities. So this is a company that's clearly in fantastic shape from a solvency perspective. But you really want to watch that, okay? And then as you go through, you're just going to get more and more details on all of the various items that we mentioned. Cash flow is another big one, the cash flow statement. And in there, you'll see how they're generating their cash flows, how much from their operating activities. And cash, like I said, is really what pays the bills. So you want to have a look at the cash flow statement as well. Okay, and then you will just get more and more information in terms of the company, their performance, and all sorts of commentary around it. Okay, so depending on how far you want to go into it, you can look at the 10Q. But at the end of the day, for the purposes of this video, a couple of things you want to look at. You want to look at the press release when it comes out. You want to be looking at their earnings per share, in particular, their forecast for the upcoming quarter. And in this case with Nvidia, are they having any delays to their production, for example? Okay, these are the things you want to look at. But the 28th of August, it's going to be a big moment in the stock market. Could have big ramifications on the stock market as well. So have a look at that. And that's my video on Nvidia earnings coming out on the 28th. Subscribe if you like the video, share it with a friend, give it a like, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought, and I'll see you in the next one.